Well, good morning. Good morning. I'm glad you all come out this morning for this wonderful Easter morning. I'm glad to see a full church. And He has risen. He is risen indeed. So again, He has risen. He has risen indeed. All right. I'm glad you guys have come. We're looking forward to a great morning today. We have we do have the announcements in the bulletin. There's not a whole lot that we need to really say. You can read through them. Other than next week, there's going to be another service 10 o'clock here. Only one service next week. No service in St. John, followed by a congregational meeting. So that is highlights in the announcement. You can read everything else. But today we are here to celebrate the risen Lord. We're here to celebrate Easter, the day that Christ raised from the dead 2,000 years ago. And I'm glad that you have come to be here. So let me open the word of prayer as we begin this morning. Oh, Holy Lord, we come before you this morning on this glorious Sunday, this day that we celebrate your resurrection. Lord, we know that as people of God, we draw close to you, particularly this time of year. I pray that you would bless our service, be with us today, and Lord, grant us assurance that you are still with us. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Please join me in the Lord's Prayer as we also learn. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Please stand and turn to number 301 in your hymnal. Hallelujah, website.
Spotless Lamb of God was he, who loves me. Hallelujah, what a Savior. Lifted up was he to die, it is finished was his cry. Now in heaven exalted high, hallelujah, what a Savior. When he comes our glorious King, all his ransom home to bring, then a new song will sing, hallelujah, what a Savior.
Our call to worship is found in your worship bulletin. We're going to pull it out. We do our responsive call to worship together this morning. Our long journey through the darkness is over.
We have advanced into the light of Jesus' resurrection.
No more do we need to fear.
No more will we feel that we are alone and lost.
Jesus lives in our hearts and in our spirits.
Jesus calls us to be a source of hope and joy for others. Hallelujah.
Please greet one another. Our next song is there's an insert in your bulletin. It's a special song we'd like to invite you to sing it with us. We're going to this spring. It's called Living Hope. It's appropriate for Easter.
began to speak to them. I truly understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. You know the message he sent to the people of Israel, preaching peace by Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. That message spread throughout Judea, beginning in Galilee after the baptism that John announced. How God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power. How he went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with them. We are witnesses to all that he did, both in Judea and in Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree. But God raised him on the third day and allowed him to appear, not to all the people, but to us who were chosen by God as witnesses, and who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. He commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is the one ordained by God as judge of the living and the dead. All the prophets testify about him, that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name.
Please stand and turn your hymnals number 305 for He is Lord.
Our second reading is 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 through 11, and that's now on page 176. All right, we're actually going to read through verse 20. Now I would remind you, brothers and sisters, of the good news that I promised to you, which you in turn received, in which also you stand, through which also you are being saved, if you hold firmly to the message that I proclaimed to you, unless you have come to believe in vain. For I handed on to you as of first importance what I in turn had received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have died. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unfit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace toward me has not been in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether then it was I or they, so we proclaim, and so you have come to believe. Now, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? If there is no resurrection of the dead, then Christ has not been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our proclamation has been in vain, and your faith has been in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God because we testified of God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if it is true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised. If Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. Then those who have died in Christ have perished. For if for this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died.
Our next song is actually 288 in the New Testament. 288 in the hymnal. Christ the Lord is risen today. 288.
The Lord is risen today. Hallelujah. All creation joins to say, Hallelujah. Raise your joys and triumphs high. Hallelujah. Sing ye heaven, earth sing wide. Hallelujah. The work is done. Hallelujah. Fight the fight, the battle won. Hallelujah. Death and fate forgets and rise. Hallelujah. Christ has opened paradise. Hallelujah. Again, our glorious King. Hallelujah. Where, oh, death is now thy sting. Hallelujah. Once he died our souls to save. Hallelujah. Where thy victory reign. Hallelujah. Glory now where Christ has led. Hallelujah. Following our exalted head. Hallelujah. Made like him we rise. Hallelujah. Rise across the great the skies. Hallelujah.
The third reading is Luke 24, verses 1 through 12, found on page 90 in the New Testament. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified and on the third day rise again?" Then they remembered his words, and returning to the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home amazed at what had happened. Our psalter is Psalm 118, verses 1 and 2, and 14 through 24. Page 565 in your order. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever.
Let Israel say, his steadfast love endures forever.
The Lord is my strength and my might. He has become my salvation.
There are glad songs of victory in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly.
The right hand of the Lord is exalted. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly.
I shall not die, but I shall live, and recount the deeds of the Lord.
The Lord has punished me severely, but he did not give me over to death.
Oh, indeed, the gates of righteousness, that I may.
The stone that the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone.
This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
Please join me as we read the Psalter this morning together. Sorry, not Psalter, the prayer of confession this morning on your bulletin. Almighty God, in raising Jesus from the grave, you shattered the power of sin and death. We confess that we remain captive to doubt and fear, bound by ways that lead to death. We overlook the poor and the hungry, and pass by those who mourn. We ignore the cries of the oppressed, and are indifferent to calls for peace. We despise the weak and abuse the earth we made. Forgive us, God of mercy. Help us to trust your power to change our lives and make us new, that we may know the joy of life abundant, given in Jesus Christ, who is Lord. Amen. Lord, we truly are grateful for the truth, Lord, that you love us so much that you gave your Son so that we no longer have to face death, but we can have eternal life. And Lord, through your Son's work on the cross, we are forgiven, Lord. Thank you for that. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. It's now time for the children's message. How you guys doing? Oh, no more. So how you guys doing today? Have any of you guys done your Easter egg hunt yet today? You did? All right. Not yet. Well, maybe Easter Bunny will come and light all the eggs over at church. Get home. You found 2 eggs and 2 more? Okay, good. So what do you guys know about Easter? What is Easter all about? on Easter eggs, okay? What else is Easter about? God's birthday? Close, that's Christmas. Jesus rises from the dead. Very good. So on Good Friday, we celebrate. We had a service and we celebrated or we remembered Jesus' death on the cross. But today is Easter morning, and Easter morning we remember that Christ rose from the dead, don't we? Did you know that after he died, they put him in a tomb in the ground in Jerusalem? Did you guys know that? And who came and found him in the morning? There was a couple people. Who went to look for him? Who's that? Mary. There's actually a couple of Marys who went after him, looked for Jesus, didn't they? They were going to go there and anoint his body because they started on Friday, but they weren't able to finish, so they'll come back in the morning and do it. Do you know what? Do you know who was really worried that something was going to happen? Didn't the disciples thought he was going to come back to life? They were they didn't really, they were worried about it, they didn't really know for sure. But who was really concerned about something about Jesus coming back? There was a couple of folks that you probably don't know, that's okay. There's the Roman government, and there's also the Pharisees and the teachers and the priests. It says the next day after the presentation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. Now, Pilate was kind of like the king of the area. And they said, we remember while Jesus was still alive, he said, after 3 days I will rise again. And so they remember that Jesus would rise again. So do you know what they did? Pilate said, go take some guards and seal the tomb and put a whole squad of guards out there to make sure that nobody takes the body of Jesus. But do what happened in the morning? It was a giant earthquake. And an angel came and the stone was rolled away and Jesus came out. You know what those guards did? They ran away. They were scared. You know what? Jesus came back to life. That's pretty cool, isn't it? And so today we celebrate the fact that Jesus came back to life and so that we can have hope in him. So that's what Easter's really about. But it's also pretty fun to find the eggs, isn't it? Yeah. Well, let's pray. Lord, I just thank you for today. I want to thank these kids, and I pray they will have a great time finding eggs. But Lord, that they also learn about you, and the fact that today is the day we remember that you conquered that. And we praise you, we thank you. Amen. Yes, go back to your parents. All right. Please turn number 302. He lives.
He's always here. He lives, Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along what's narrow way. He lives, salvation to all. You're asking how I know he lives. He lives in my heart. All the world around me, I see his loving care. And though I grow weary, I never will despair. I know that he is leading through all the stormy paths. And rivers of beauty will all that pass. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know he lives. He lives within my heart. My social Christian, lift up your voice. all who seek Him, the help of all who find. The Mother is so loving, so good and kind. He lives, for Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along the narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart.
On this beautiful Easter morning, we have the opportunity to once again open the Word of God and to see what He has for us today. And today we are looking at the risen King out of the book of Luke, verses 24, verses 1 through 12 primarily. But I want to begin this morning with a question. We had read this passage just a few minutes ago. Lana read it as part of our lectionary readings this morning. But I have a question for you as we begin. Can a person who calls himself a Christian ever wrestle with the veracity or the truth of the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Can a person who calls himself a Christian ever wrestle with this question? Or can they doubt? This morning I'm going to argue that the question is yes, but there's more to come. Let me pray. Lord, as we dive into this word, my prayer is that it will be your words spoken this morning, not mine. Lord, send your Holy Spirit to illuminate it to us, and so in such a way that we walk away this morning with hope and with assurance of our faith in Jesus Christ. And we thank you, we praise you, and all God's people said, amen. I want to say it's natural at one point or another for everyone to doubt. The truth is that we all doubt at different things in our life. We doubt whether we can accomplish a goal that we've set, whether it's a financial goal or a family goal or a career goal. We all doubt those kind of things. Sometimes we doubt whether our family members are up for whatever challenges they are going for, or our friends, or a church, or any of those things. So doubting is kind of a normal thing. But the story of the resurrection of Christ is so absolutely fantastic that you can't doubt, can't you? She's going to come preach this morning with that, which is fine. She's fine. It's okay. We like kids, so it's great. When we were young families, we were young parents, we'd be mortified if our kids did that. But the pastor always said it's okay, and I always said no way. But yeah, believe me, it's fine. But it's such a fantastic story about somebody who died, was hung on a cross, put in a tomb, and 3 days later rose from the dead. That it's incredible. So doubting is logical. But the reality is this, is that you will either work through your doubt and accept Christianity for what it says, or you will eventually fall away from the faith. Noted English author Michael Green said it this way: Christianity does not hold the resurrection to be one among many tenets of faith. Without belief in the resurrection, there would be no Christianity at all. The Christian church would have never begun. The Jesus movement would have fizzled out like a damn squid in his execution. Christianity stands or falls with the truth of the resurrection. Once disprove it, and you have disposed of Christianity. Is that true? I believe it is. You see, Paul talked about, we read it this morning in our 1 Corinthians passage when it was read from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 through 20. Paul noted in 1 Corinthians 15 in this famous passage where he reasoned out the arguments for the resurrection. He reasoned out and said, what would happen if Christ did not raise from the dead? Paul was saying that's foolish, because if Christ did not raise from the dead, then Christians do not rise from the dead, and those two things are coupled together. He says in verses 14 and verse 17 of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he says, if Christ had not been risen, then our preaching is in vain. Every pastor who stands up, every priest who stands up, every teacher of the word that stands up from 2,000 years ago until this very morning, it is all in vain unless Christ raised from the dead. He says that we are all despicable liars because we preach the resurrection of Christ. He says our faith is in vain. We have nothing to base upon what we believe if Christ didn't raise from the dead. We are still in our sin. Because you see, he conquered death, he conquered sin. Dead Christians have perished with no hope of the next life. Kind of goes along with the Sadducees. There was the Pharisees and the Sadducees, if you want to keep them separate. The Sadducees were sad, you see, because they didn't believe in the resurrection. The Pharisees did. We'd be like the Sadducees, who believe that this life was only lived for today, for tomorrow we die, and that's the end of existence. Why even have a belief in God if you have no hope for anything else after this life? Finally, in verse 19, we are to be pitied more than all men. You might as well just go do something else in your life. You might as well never come to church. Just go drinking and having fun and go out to the lake or whatever you want to do, because this is all a waste of time if Christ didn't raise from the dead. It's not good enough just to be a good human or a good humanitarian. Without the resurrection of Christ, we are hopeless. See, that's my point. The resurrection is the central fact of our faith. If you disprove it, there's absolutely nothing left. That's why, from the very beginning, skeptics have attacked this part of our faith. They have attacked the resurrection of Christ Jesus. They don't attack the virgin birth. They don't attack the miracles. They don't attack that he died. It's all understandable and explainable. But what they can't explain is something back from the dead. It's a little bit of a stretch. And that's why we welcome questions on Easter Sunday. That's why we ask these hard facts and say, listen, this has got to be the basis of our truth. One Sunday morning in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, these things happened. And this raises a series of questions. Suppose we had been the first one there on Easter morning. Would we have believed in the resurrection, or would we have doubted the resurrection? We all sit here and say, of course I would have believed. Of course I would have listened to Jesus. Of course I would have heard him say that he was going to rise again in 3 days. But would you? Would you have really? Because his disciples didn't believe it. The disciples weren't expecting it. They were all hiding. If we had been there in Jerusalem with Matthew, James, and John, would we have believed the strange rumors that Sunday morning? We begin with a simple observation that they were not expecting a resurrection. That was the farthest thing from their mind. Forget his predictions. Forget that they were all the grave talk that had happened. Forget the wild dreams. They had absolutely given up. They were hiding out in the upper room. They were nowhere to be seen. They weren't waiting near the tomb for him to come out. They were hiding. Strange fact. Who really expected problems? And I talked about this with the children this morning. Who really expected the problems? Well, Matthew 27, 62 through 66, the Jewish leaders had more faith in the disciples, and so did the Romans. It says the next day, the one after the presentation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate and said, "Sir, remember that while he was still alive, the deceiver said," and the deceiver is Christ, "after 3 days I will rise again." So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, the disciples may come and steal the body and tell people that he had been risen from the dead. The last deception will be worse than the first. Take a guard, Pilate answered. Go make the tomb as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb as secure by putting a seal on it and a stone and posting the guard. In fact, they thought it was a whole squad of guards. These weren't just any normal guard. They were kind of like the guards that guarded Pilate. And they were the best. The best were like the special forces. They wouldn't leave their posts. But they did. That morning when the earthquake struck and the stone was rolled away. The believers had no thought of the resurrection. Who came first to the tomb that morning? It was the women. They were not looking for a resurrection. No, Mark 16:1 says that they came to anoint the body of Jesus. You see, they had begun on Friday to anoint the body, but they ran out of time because the Sabbath was approaching and they had to leave. They were coming back to finish the job they had not completed. And when they got there, the stone was rolled away, and all four Gospels agree on this point that the women did not have the slightest clue of what had happened. They were not looking for a resurrection. An angel told them, in fact, it says 2 angels appeared to them, and they told them that he is not here. He has risen from the dead. Mark puts it this way: trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. John picks it up and he says that when Mary left, she found Peter and John and said to them, "They have taken away the Lord from the tomb, and we don't know where they have put them." They still haven't got it all figured out. They're still expecting that the body is still dead. They still haven't got all the pieces put together. Luke adds a final detail when he says that the women told the rest of the disciples that Jesus has raised from the dead. They did not believe the women because it sounded like nonsense. Nonsense, of course. No one rises from the dead for 3 days. No one, after being beaten and scourged, being hung on a cross, after sitting on a cross for 6 hours and taken down after a spear was thrust through its side, and having been covered with 150 pounds of spices and wrapped in suffocating cloths. There's no way he could have risen out of that tomb. Sure, he did say he would rise. We all believe it. But I think we would have a hard time just as the disciples did. You see, they were there with him for 3 years, 3.5 years, walking around. He kept saying over and over again that he was going to raise from the dead, and they just didn't get it. Mark says, when they heard that Jesus was alive, they did not believe it. His best friends didn't believe it. What finally convinced them? What finally got their attention that maybe he rose from the dead? Was that he appeared to them in bodily form, physical bodily form, not a vision, not an apparition, not a ghost, but an actual physical body. Jesus appeared before them. The tomb was empty. The angel said he had risen. And all that could be explained, but Jesus himself appeared to them, alive from the dead, the same Jesus, the one they had watched die. He appeared to them. He saw them. They touched him. They heard his voice. They looked into his face. They watched him closely. It was true. He was alive. And that brings us back to the original question: can a person who calls himself a Christian ever doubt the veracity of the resurrection of Christ? Yes, indeed. Those who knew him the best doubted until they saw him face to face. So you see, doubters are welcome to the cross. They are welcome on this Easter morning. The disciples didn't believe until they saw him. Now there was this disciple, a man named Thomas. You may have heard of him. In fact, we call him what? The Doubting Thomas, right? He was the one that always gets the bad rap. He's like, well, are you going to be a doubting Thomas? All of the disciples were doubting disciples. It was doubting John and doubting Matthew and doubting Peter. And yes, doubting Thomas, but he gets pointed out. See, somehow Thomas missed the early morning meeting on Easter Sunday. I think he must have been heartbroken and somehow was off by himself and suffering alone. When the news of the resurrection came, he couldn't believe it. After all these years, Thomas had been given such a bad reputation, but he's really no worse than any of the others. He said, I won't believe it unless I see him and I touch him, and then I may believe. So we look down at him, but Jesus didn't. Jesus didn't look down at Thomas. He said to Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands. Reach into my side. And then he said, stop doubting and believe. Jesus didn't put him down. He said, go ahead, see for yourself. Make up your own mind. Doubters are welcome at the empty tomb. So we need to stop doubting and believe. We cannot leave this matter on its own. We must say, my Lord, my God, I believe in you. No one can remain neutral forever. You can't bring your doubts to the empty tomb, but you have to make a choice. You can't stay on the fence. Doubting is not a sin, but at some point you have to start doubting, you have to start believing. Either you believe or you don't. This Easter morning, it is a wonderful day to make that choice. It's a day to stop doubting and start believing. You know that Jesus died. There's no doubt about that. You know that he died for you. And yes, we do know that he rose again from the dead. The question is very simple. What have you done with my son? Jesus said, stop doubting and begin to believe. And that is a hope this morning. We stand here this morning and I cry out, he is risen.
He is risen indeed.
He is risen.
He is risen indeed.
That is what we believe. That is the cornerstone of our faith. Without the resurrection of Christ, we are lost. And so for me and my family, we believe in the resurrection of Christ. And we serve not a dead, martyred king, but a risen Lord. The King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the God Almighty, the first and the last, the Alpha and Omega. We believe in Jesus Christ, our living Lord. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you so much this morning. We thank you for your word, and we thank you for this gospel, the good news that points us to you. Lord, we know that through your resurrection, we have salvation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Please turn to number 300, kindergarten.
Savior is falling, but the birds don't know the voice of hope. His voice to me is calling. And he walks with me and he talks with me. And he tells me I am his own. And the joy we share is everywhere. No other has ever known.
Now time for tithes and offerings.
Blessings flow, praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above the heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.
Please join in our affirmation of faith found on the front of your hymnal. I believe in God, Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Ghost, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. He descended into hell. The third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven, and sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Amen. Lord, as we depart from this place this morning, help us to make that decision, Lord, either to accept the veracity of your resurrection or to reject it. Lord, let us not sit on the fence, for you are our Lord, and you have risen. You have risen indeed. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. All the trees of the field will clap their hands. Trees of the field will clap their hands. Trees of the field will clap their hands. We go out with joy. We go out with joy and be there forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will bring forth before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. All the trees of the field will clap